Hi, I'm Lisa Leiter. In Chicago Business Today, Kraft's crumbling cookie business. Kraft sales of cookies and crackers have dropped over the past few months, posing a threat to Chief Executive Irene Rosenfeld's growth strategy. It's another challenge for Rosenfeld, who is trying to combine operations with Cadbury and hit ambitious growth goals. I sat down with Crain's reporter David Sterrett to talk about his story in this week's print edition of Crain's, and also last week's big news that Sara Lee was soliciting bids for its bread business. So what's going on with Oreos? Why is Kraft losing market share with its cookies and crackers business?
Well, it seems like in the last 3 months, Kraft has raised prices back up slightly. They had cut them pretty heavily during the previous year when consumers were struggling. And it looks like they started to kind of cut back on some of the promotions. And as a result, it looks like people have started buying a little less and starting to cut back their intake of some of Kraft's, marquee cookie and cracker brands like Oreo and Chips Ahoy and Ritz.
Is there any chance that they might cut prices again?
Analysts say that it's probably unlikely because they're starting to see a little cost pressure with some of the commodities. So they think that to offset the increased costs as well as to hold the profitability of the products, that they don't expect manufacturers such as Kraft to get too promotional, but probably try to hold prices level so they can maintain their profitability.
How much of an issue is this slowdown in what is one of Kraft's key businesses? I mean, after all, this is exactly the kind of thing that investors were concerned about when Irene Rosenfeld was pursuing Cadbury.
This is not a trend that investors and analysts want to see, and obviously they're hoping this is just a blimp in the road, a 3 or 4 month struggle maybe due to pricing, but this is a really key business for them. This was before they bought Cadbury. This was one of their strongest businesses. So it is really important that it maintains a growth rate that will meet the overall companies. I mean, they see most of their growth overseas and with some of Cadbury's cookie and gum businesses. But at the same time, this is such a large business that they need to make sure it keeps growing, or that will be a big headache for Irene.
Some of these food companies are really struggling that during the recession, the private label market has really increased.
Yeah, exactly. The store brands were not much of a factor in cookies and crackers historically. I mean, it's been dominated by brands such as Oreo and Keebler. But with the recession and a growing improvement in the store brands making their products a higher quality, we are starting to see more people choose private label cookies and crackers. And in the long term, that could be a challenge for people like Kraft because it will mean they'll face more competition from cheaper store brands.
Well, let's move on to the bread business. Last week's big news, Sara Lee looking for a suitor for its bread business. What do we know about that? Where does that stand?
What we've heard is that they've been kind of quietly shopping around. I mean, it doesn't appear that they're having an auction at this point, but it does appear that Brenda herself and her management team have decided they at least want to look at the possibility seriously of selling the bread business, which is kind of their namesake. The Sara Lee brand is on most of the bread they sell.
And who's the most likely bidder for that business?
Well, I mean, there's talk that some private equity companies might be interested and run it for profit. Also, the strategic buyers and the competitors. I mean, people have mentioned Hostess, which recently came out of its own bankruptcy troubles. Campbell's Soup owns Pepperidge Farm, could be another name. And Bimbo has recently been buying up bakeries and has become a very large player in the national bakery market.
And what would it mean for Sara Lee if they were able to dump that business?
Well, I mean, Sara Lee, since Brenda Barnes took over more than 5 years ago, they've been pretty much shedding businesses and not adding businesses. They're about to complete a lot of the sale of their overseas household and body care businesses, and the businesses keep getting smaller and smaller. And if they were to unload the bread business, it would leave them with pretty much a meats business here in the U.S. and then an overseas coffee business. And many people think if that's what they have left, they might just somehow sell off the whole company or spin it off into different parts, and could mean kind of the end of Sara Lee as we know it now.
Wow, well, it remains to be seen. We'll probably be watching this story over the next couple of weeks. And of course, Sara Lee isn't talking yet, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, David, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Lisa.
And that's this edition of Chicago Business Today. For more on this story, be sure to check out this week's print edition of Crain's or chicagobusiness.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.